Years before Ellen, Will and Grace, or Drag Race, a young Cuban-American immigrant changed how Americans thought about queer people when he joined the cast of The Real World San Francisco.
So now, how did you get so involved in your work?
I thought for a second of how can I go around it. I said, no, forget it. I'm HIV positive.
Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. Full disclosure, before we go on, I worked for Buena Murray, the production company behind The Real World, for many years, but not during the 90s and never on this show. This is Pedro Zamora. He was only the third queer roommate ever to appear on The Real World, and he was the first to publicly disclose his HIV status. In fact, he was one of the first people ever to disclose his HIV status on television. It wasn't an accident that Zamora ended up on The Real World. Producers were looking for someone to round out the San Francisco cast, and Zamora, who'd been diagnosed with HIV in high school, was already known nationwide as an activist and an educator. He applied because he thought he could have a bigger impact as a cast member of something like The Real World than he could traveling coast to coast speaking to individual groups. In the cover letter that Zamora included with his audition tape, he wrote, "So why should I be on The Real World? Because in The Real World, there are people living productive lives who just happen to be HIV positive. I think it's important for people my age to see a young person who looks and feels healthy, can party and have fun, but at the same time needs to take 5 pills a day to stay healthy. I know that being on The Real World would mean exposing the most intimate details of my life on national television. How comfortable am I with that? Well, if I can answer the questions of an auditorium full of 5th graders with inquiring minds, I'm sure I could do it on national television." And he did, being open and honest with his housemates and taking every opportunity to educate them about HIV and AIDS, even when they didn't realize that that's what he was doing. It's kind of hard to explain how much of a bombshell Pedro's presence in the house was, not just for a few of the roommates, but for most of the viewing audience. When The Real World San Francisco premiered in 1994, AIDS was the leading cause of death for all Americans aged 25 to 44, but it still carried an enormous stigma as a disease that only targeted perverts and drug users. Of course, that wasn't true, but most people's mental image of an AIDS patient wasn't of a charming, vibrant, handsome young man from Miami. Pedro's very presence made people question everything they knew, or thought they knew, about HIV and AIDS and the people who had it. The day after his death, the Wall Street Journal quoted one of the hundreds of fan letters that Pedro received, in which a woman from South Carolina wrote, "I never thought anyone could change my opinion of homosexuals and AIDS. Because of you, I saw the human side of something that once seemed so unreal to me." But Pedro's biggest impact was on young people, especially young Latina people, whether he was speaking to them in person or through the television screen. The governor of Florida was quoted as saying that it would be impossible to calculate how many lives Pedro saved by speaking frankly about his experience of living with HIV, whether it was to high school students or to members of Congress. Zamora's health declined rapidly during filming, due in no small part to the constant stress of his clashes with Puck, who was eventually evicted from the house. He was hospitalized less than 3 months after the season wrapped filming for toxoplasmosis and something called PML, which attacks the frontal lobe of the brain. He never left the hospital. As a gesture of gratitude for his work, President Bill Clinton, Attorney General Janet Reno, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, negotiated an agreement with the Cuban government to allow 20,000 Cubans per year to enter the U.S. U.S. Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen then worked with the Cuban government to make sure that Zamora's 4 older siblings and their families were among the first Cubans admitted so that they could be reunited before he died. Pedro Zamora died on November 11, 1994, just hours after the season finale of Real World San Francisco aired on MTV. He was just 22 years old. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.